You know what's great? Playing Shadow of the Erdtree. You know what's not great? Not playing Shadow of the Erdtree, because you have to go out and cook yourself sustenance to survive playing more Shadow of the Erdtree. And that's where today's sponsor, Factor, can help you. Factor is the best meal service currently on the platform. They are absolutely worth it. I get their stuff outside of the sponsor. I have my own subscription. I have tried a multitude of their options, including protein, low-cal, keto, etc. All of it specifically is incredible when it comes down to ease of use and flavor. Poke a few holes in the packaging, throw it in the microwave, bada bing, bada boom. You have a delicious meal that hits your macros, gets you the flavor you want, and everything in between. So if you'd like to check out the extremely convenient Factor, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code Bricky50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code Bricky50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. Thank you for sponsoring this video, Factor, and let's talk about Elden Ring. I stand here at the grace granted to me from defeating the optional boss, Jory Elder Inquisitor. Ahead of me looms a brand new location known as the Abyssal Woods. It is not what I'd call comforting. My mighty steed Torrent, who will graciously fight flaming giants and aliens beyond our comprehension, as well as plummet to his death when I miss a jump, refuses to show himself due to unimaginable fear. The game warns me of the enemies ahead, and yet despite this, I forge onwards, my weapons useless against the power of my own hubris. Then I meet the foe I was warned about. Turns out, combat is in fact not an option. As I sneak by, I find a decrepit mansion, Midra's manse, and was told to turn back at once. Not learning my lesson the first time, I continued along the short but enjoyable legacy dungeon, fighting off a variety of enemies both in terms of their movesets as well as visuals, attacks, and status effects. Finally, I come to Midra himself, who I promptly teach a lesson in manners. I've put my dick in worse. I then got to experience one of the best boss fights in all of Elden Ring, both the base game and the DLC. The movement was fluid, the combos weren't too long, the music brought me right back to Bloodborne. And I had truly felt like I experienced peak From Software in action. Then, leaving the Abyssal Woods with my head held high, I enter a brand new zone. I am then tasked to fight a reskinned dragon, a Tibia Mariner that spawns a Revenant, and another goddamn Deathrite bird. This was the best encapsulation of what Shadow of the Erdtree was like to play. A long, strong segment of fantastic FromSoft level and boss design, achieving and often surpassing even the best parts of the base game. Clearly implementing the knowledge they learned from their mistakes of that very title, juxtaposed with more reused enemies, reused bosses, and regular enemies that feel like they have the movesets of bosses. It really is more Elden Ring, for better and for worse. DLC packages for FromSoft games are always a bit of a tricky thing to discuss, aren't they? I don't think you'd be wrong in saying that even calling this a DLC is doing it justice. This is much more in the vein of expansion packs brought on from the olden days of gaming. Large offerings measured in the tens of hours as opposed to small weapons, skins, and character upgrades. But if you were to review any of their Souls titles, you would be expected to include the DLC packs with it. In some cases, I'd say in a lot of cases actually, without their expansion packs, the final score of the titles themselves would vary drastically. It would be a strange thing to think of Dark Souls 1 without Artorias, but he is part of the aptly named Artorias of the Abyss expansion. Dark Souls 2 is an overhated title, but Crown of the Sunken Iron and Ivory King being removed would be a massive blow to its already spotty reputation. Bloodborne is my favorite Souls game that FromSoft has made, yet I'm aware that without the Old Hunters DLC, it is a significantly worsened product. How can you truly experience Bloodborne without Ludwig, Maria, and the Orphan? How can you say you've bested the Lovecraftian experience without knowing the fear of missing a dodge against a shark giant? But for Elden Ring, that's a bit of a different story. To call this an expansion pack while it contains similar amounts of content to full games just feels obtuse. How can we rate the base game when it's already so big and the expansion has its own leveling system separate from the main title? It would be more apt to compare Shadow of the Erdtree as something more along the lines of a shorter sequel to a game, the ODST to our Halo 3. This is especially fair considering the price tag. I think as time continues, we will view both of these as separate games, and in doing so, I want to look at it in a view that reflects that, despite the fact I will be referring to this as a DLC the entire time for ease of discussion. Despite me describing this game as basically its own product, it does still require the base game in order to access. The two bosses you will need to defeat is Star Scourge Radahn and Mohg Lord of Blood. This will naturally put you into a pretty deep playthrough, probably taking minimum 20 to 30 hours to even reach this point before being able to access the expansion whatsoever. You can of course do some quick skips in various parts of Elden Ring to get there quicker, however it will leave you woefully underleveled for a very challenging DLC. The reasoning for this will become clear later, but a point should be made about how much you need to play Elden Ring before even beginning this DLC. Once you have completed the festival and convinced Mohg he isn't being the allegations, an NPC will spawn next to Miquella's arm. She will teach you how to enter the realm of shadow by touching the McDonald's lettuce coming out of the egg and transporting you to a completely brand new area of the game, not connected to the main Elden Ring map. From there, you and Torrent are off to the races. This is an Elden Ring experience, and that means you are meant to sally forth and explore this world to discover new items, kill new enemies, and smash your head against the next big boss. And for a lot of people, their journey will be abruptly ended by this guy right here, one of the first enemies you encounter in the game. I began the Elden Ring DLC after a particularly early patch for the game that helped buff a new leveling mechanic, the Scadutree blessings. These are specific blessings only intended for use during the game's DLC and only buff you when you are in the realm of shadow. The more blessings you have, the more damage you do and the less damage you take in return. This new mechanic has been met with a lot of mixed opinions, but as far as I'm concerned, the Scadutree fragments are a fantastic addition to this kind of game. To explain that, in a product like Elden Ring that is so extremely long and allows you into the DLC at a variety of different levels depending on your general skill level and equipment, it's almost an impossible task to balance properly. This issue is apparent in literally every other Souls DLC they have released. Every Bloodborne playthrough I've ever done has me aborting the Orphan and then being massively overleveled for the rest of the game. Radahn is a mid-game boss fight and Mohg a serious endgame one, but there are plenty of skips to get you there quicker, as well as the ability to just, run through a lot of the game. Whether you arrive to the DLC at level 80 or 150 is anyone's guess. This doesn't even take into account everything else about your character, your flask healing power, its charges, if you're using summons or strong status effect builds, or just if you're even good at the game. The Skibbity fragments solve two main issues with Elden Ring, fixing the leveling issue the best it can, and giving you a really good reason to go out and explore. When I launched my initial Elden Ring review, Elden Ring! I left with an overwhelming feeling that while the game was very good in many aspects, it also felt shockingly unfinished. An exceptional amount of reused bosses, samey dungeons, and large open areas that often weren't even worth engaging with. Tell me, with my realistic close-up SpongeBob gag style face, that you killed more than one Kaled dog or bird before giving up and realizing it wasn't worth it. Look at me and say you enjoyed engaging with the mountaintop of the giants in any capacity. Exploration in the base game of Elden Ring rarely ever translated to any kind of real power in terms of your character. You can make arguments that new weapons, summon spells, and such count as power, but I'm specifically referring to the idea that if you are struggling with a fight and you want to get better, you have to level yourself up. In other games, that's totally fine, but in Elden Ring, it could lead to a shitload of downtime. And if we're going to try and get levels, that normally meant you just farmed a specific group of enemies all day. What I love about the Scarecrow fragments is that it is a direct and strong source of power that you can get from exploring, and specifically from exploring. Boss giving you trouble, that early game knight in the Everjail being a shitlord, go out there and find more fragments. They won't just make a difference, they are the difference. It solved my big issue with exploring in Elden Ring, where often I felt like I was wasting time. If I wasn't killing things, I wasn't progressing. And open world enemies offered so few runes, it wasn't even worth bothering with. Real, tangible exploration with real, tangible rewards while helping DLC balance scaling in regards to various player levels? You done it again, Miyazaki! As I previously mentioned, I begin the DLC post the Skibidi fragment buff, providing a noticeable benefit to fragment collection in the early game and tapering off a bit near the late game. From what I could see, most moves that would hit me that 2 or 3 shotted people before the patch would require at least one more strike to kill. For example, thanks to the small goat I sacrificed in real life before the fight, Rellana, the twin moon lady, only ever did the gigantic moon attack on me once, and I didn't die despite failing to dodge a couple of the hits. This absolutely would have killed me if I had been playing pre-patch and or had fewer Sicario fragments. What a lot of people may not realize is that a FromSoft Souls-like game is not a game where every single percentage will make a massive difference, at least not from the day-to-day and fight-to-fight gameplay, because it's a game of thresholds. Often it takes a pretty large percentage to change your death from a 3-shot kill to a 2-shot kill, and while there are various other factors such as your armor, the amount you heal, and so on, it is at the end of the day all about how many more hits it takes. That being said, while surviving one more hit is a big deal, I would feel disingenuous to say that it is too easy. Through my entire time playing it, I constantly felt like I was getting the intended experience, and there is no better way to describe that than when I had entered the first legacy dungeon, Belurat. If you are not familiar with the term, a legacy dungeon is a colloquial phrase for a more linear environment that feels like what old gamers would just call a level. A multi-layered combat arena, often disallowing the use of torrent, filled to the brim with enemies, and having a major boss at the end, if not a minor boss in the middle as well. Think Stormvale Castle, Raya Lucaria, Volcano Manor, and Lane Dell. As far as my criticisms go against Elden Ring, their legacy dungeons are not part of it. In fact, I simply wish there were more. Lane Dell might be the best legacy dungeon in any Souls game I have ever played due to its sheer size, grandeur, level design, and a truly fantastic boss. Belurat contains this exact same feeling. It is a burned out zone left as a remnant from Mesmer's war, so the entire area has this torn up Pompeii look to it, and the amount of things to do here is just perfect. The area is vast with large amounts of verticality and mostly good enemy designs. The man-flies are disgusting, and the giant scorpions send a fight-or-flight response to my icky-wicky nervous system. The only real stain on this area are those stupid spinny enemies with their 70-year-long combos as well as their bigger brothers. However, it all coalesces into what might be one of the most FromSoft bosses I have fought against. Saying opinions are mixed on the Dancing Lion boss would be an understatement. I've heard massive praise and hatred for this boss, and I want to focus on it because it encapsulates all of the good and the bad of recent FromSoft boss design. So let's start with the good. Like, you know, the lore. The lore's solid. The Dancing Lion enemies are defenders of the tower and were initially used during the festival and then were turned to martial and combat purposes during Mesmer's invasion, which it didn't go so well. Let's try to dissect this boss a bit to really show why this is one of those FromSoft bosses. Visual design, incredible. Maybe one of the best looking bosses in all of Elden Ring. It's a take on the classic Chinese dragon style character design, but instead implements it for use in Elden Ring. Plus, it's a lion. Music. This is one of the most improved upon aspects of Shadow of the Erdtree compared to the base game. No game by From Software has bad music, but out of all of the prior Souls titles and even non-Souls titles, it felt like the weakest. There are some bangers such as the Godskin Apostles, Mo, Godfrey, and Radagon of course, but a ton of it felt middling. There was a significant improvement in music to almost all of the main bosses of this DLC, and that should not go unmentioned. There is a lot to like about the Divine Lion, and if the above aspects are things that matter the most to you in a fight, then there's a good chance you will really love this boss. However, there are negatives. The actual fight itself has a few issues, most primarily the classic god-awful camera that Souls games have become known for. The lion is a hulking and erratic mess of movement, and therefore your camera is whipped side to side at a constant pace. Now, it's no King of Storms in Dark Souls 3, but it is a pain in the ass. That erratic movement though is also in its attacks because it has all the hallmarks of a late stage Elden Ring boss. Multiple long attack chains, huge AoE moves, and long delayed strikes that do a ton of damage. Not only are all of these present, but they are present on an enemy that moves so strangely because of its animations that you sometimes can't tell if it's an attack or just shifting its weight. I defeated the lion in 4 tries with the post patch. I had a good amount of fragments and in fairness didn't learn its moves too well and just sort of face rolled it because there was so much going on. I stand to believe that this boss is a good litmus test to determine how much you'll enjoy the rest of the DLC because it has all of the good and all of the bad of most Elden Ring fights. I brought up issues I had with Elden Ring earlier in my video, and I think it would be smart to go over these problems as we continue to talk. In my prior video I did on the base game, I rambled and ranted about plenty, but the bullet list came out looking like this. Unfinished parts of the game, gameplay that couldn't keep up with the boss design, a lack of meaningful power rewards, reusing enemies, and unrewarding open world, at least in terms of gameplay. Now, some of these might have you nodding along, and others might have you dumbfounded by my terrible takes, but regardless of your position, that was what I deemed as its largest issues. I said Shadow of the Erdtree took 5 steps forward and 3 steps back, so in order to define where those steps are going, we have to go point by point. Let's start with power rewards. Elden Ring, being the first real open world style Souls game, meant that exploration was a huge aspect of the loop, and in fact is probably what carried a lot of the initial enjoyment in the title. The environments were so vast that you often didn't think there would be something actually worth finding half the time. However, you'd be half right, but often that would lead itself into the Miyazaki's monkey paw. You explore the world. You don't expect to find much in this small area of the map. You do find something. It's an Everjail. It contains a regular style enemy disguised as if it was a boss. You explore the world. You find a destroyed church. It contains an upgrade for your Estus. Yay! You explore the world. You find an entire brand new underground area. You make your way through and it gives you mostly nothing but spells you can't use. You explore the world. You find a dungeon. It is mostly stone imps and at the end a boss. The boss is also a reused normal enemy and rewards you with spirit ashes of the enemy you just killed. This basically repeats ad nauseum. The problem it runs into is that under half the time the reward you receive for doing all that you have done is an item that is completely uninteresting to you and your build, or just plain old filler content like a reused boss fight. The first time around it's genuinely exciting to find new areas, but that area is almost always containing something that doesn't live up to the hype of finding the area in its own right. This is clearly an anecdotal situation, but it ended up killing a large amount of replayability for Elden Ring, knowing that most of the things I would be finding would end up not being worth the effort, but still having to do it in order to create the build I wanted or simply maintain the levels I needed to progress through the game at a decent pace. This is compounded by the issue of the unrewarding open world in terms of gameplay, because like I said earlier, did you ever fight the enemies just roaming the area? I did once and only once, because after level 10 they simply don't offer enough rewards or runes to be worth bothering. Maybe some of the earlier areas, but like, come on, half of this stuff just isn't worth bothering with. Shadow of the Erdtree improved on this about 40% more. To say there are enemies not worth fighting would be completely correct. The gigantic furnace golems are an absolute chore, and after biting one's ankles for 30 seconds, I realized the futility of my actions while I had no pots on hand. But for the rest of the game, the open world enemies are tuned to reward you often with normal enemy style runes. There are few enemies just populating the open spaces doing absolutely nothing, but instead often pockets of enemies and encampments that reward you real levels and often a much larger variety of items. This doesn't solve the main issue, but it does put it in a step in the right direction. Exploring the world and going through the manfly town, killing all of them and being rewarded with manfly ashes is not great, it's in fact pretty mediocre, but comparing that to what you would have been rewarded with for killing a flock of Kalid birds is night and day. Plus, the reason they can do this as much as they do is because giving the player a ton of runes is something they can be more liberal with, because a lot of your DLC power is going to arrive from the skibbity fragments anyway. So even if you go through an area with somewhat mediocre rewards, there's a good chance by the end of it you'll get something meaningful to all players. It isn't a dice roll on whether or not you can use the item or cast the spell. Fragments are important to all and incentivize that exploration. Often they give you items with the fragment too, but not being able to use the item doesn't hurt as much because you know at least you got something to buff yourself up. So overall, it is a tough position to be in if you're making a game like Elden Ring. It's a problem that in itself almost feels like it's created due to wanting to make an open world Souls-like video game. But I don't know if there is any genuinely good way to fully fix this, but I do think the Scadutree fragments come as close as they're going to get. For the last two topics, being bosses and reused enemies, they take the roles of positive and negative. For a large majority of the DLC, the enemies are unique and often not reutilized. Now, you have some repeats here and there, but me being annoyed by seeing more of the Castle Knights would be similar to me being annoyed at seeing too many Leyndell Knights. It's very much a part of the world, and that's just how it is. Where I end up actually having a lot of issues is the reusing of enemies in large environments of the game that absolutely do deserve larger enemy variety. It's a tricky situation to be balancing on because there are a lot of individual complaints that the solution to would be implementing other complaints. Some areas with bad enemies would be better if they were empty, but also empty areas would be better if there were more enemies. This sounds incredibly stupid, so let me try to explain myself the best without sounding like an idiot. In the base game of Elden Ring, there is a total of 12 different dragon fights. I do not like these dragon fights. I simply think that these are boring fights that are tedious, take forever, and are often unrewarding. Humorously, I believe that the area without the dragon in it would actually be more enjoyable enjoyable as a gameplay experience than with the dragon. Sometimes you don't need to replace the enemy. You can just have that area be open and really explore and give your players time to digest it. Very often, the best games know the proper loop when it comes to giving the player a bit of rest. This is all just game science. One of the reasons battle royales are so effective is because they give you the back to the lobby refresher, and it isn't always go, go, go. This is actually one of the few issues I have with Titanfall 2, one of the greatest shooters ever made, because the game is so intense, so stimulating, that often playing a singular hour of it feels like playing 4 hours of any other game. Now, you might say that the bonfires are the way you relax in Elden Ring, and often going back to the roundtable hold I do think is fulfilling this, but because of how much exploration and enemies you are fighting, sometimes the game will actually just let you relax by entering the new area. I don't know about you, but sometimes the most surreal and enjoyable experience of Elden Ring is just riding Torrent, relaxed, not fighting anything, and then entering a brand new gorgeous zone, seeing the text location pop up on screen. A lot of the times, a random enemy or boss ended up ruining that feeling for me. Often a dragon, and also often a deathrite bird or something similar. So let me tell you how annoyed I was when I was heading up to fight Bayle the Dread, arguably the best dragon fight I've played, and be forced to kill not one, not two, but 4 separate versions of the base game dragon. 2 of them at the same time, and one of them with large AoE lightning attacks, which is infuriating because the trip up to the top of the mountain to fight Bayle is a visual masterpiece. How you can hear the sleeping dragon as you get closer, how the thunder gets louder and louder and the environment becomes more inhospitable, covered in dead dragons and turbulent wind. Up and up and up you go, and it is such an incredible visual experience, all the while including the most excellent NPC the game has to offer. That feeling just gets ruined when you have to fight the regular ass dragon you fought 12 of 4 more goddamn times. I understand this is a dragon area. I realize that from a lore perspective, there should be dragons, but you certainly could have done a better job than copying and pasting the same base game dragon. This is a situation where I absolutely think that you could have just not put the dragons there. It may be Dragon Peak, but there are many other types of smaller style dragon enemies, or perhaps little whelp fodder that would have fit perfectly for this. But even if we don't have any of those, I'm pretty sure I would have been okay with just not having those dragons, or at least not 4 of the damn things. Maybe one of them is fine, but you can populate the other areas with more normal enemies that aren't just reusing the dragons. Which is going to make me sound like a massive hypocrite right now, because then there are other parts of the map that feel like there's absolutely nothing there whatsoever and that do need more enemies. In the northeastern part of the map, there is a boss known as Commander Gaius who teaches you the secret art of the pork missile. Once he's defeated, you can enter a brand new area utilizing a gesture. This whole area contains a large amount of lore importance and is enormous, taking up a huge amount of your map. However, it is almost anemic with how few enemies exist here, and the ones that do exist are once again reused fights. The first main enemies you fight are not 1 but 2 separate tree sentinels, and past that there is a boss arena that contains another one of the falling star beasts, something I could have lived forever without seeing again. The largest part of this area that contains new enemies are these horrifying looking larva teeth mouth long-limbed albino god knows what the hell that make up this enormous section full of fingers. However, if you were, perchance, one of those who saw the part of the map and thought, I wonder what boss fight is going to be down here in that big circle, then you'd be real disappointed finding out it's just a gigantic horn to blow into, and along the way, more of those terrifying enemies with homing ranged grab attacks to stunlock you with. This isn't actually the only place that has this problem too. In the exact opposite side of the map, you have the Cerulean Coast that is is also a large and beautiful area, but filled with almost nothing. There are a few more enemies down here, and they are unique ones, but they're incredibly scarce. And again, looking at this part of the map, you would generally assume a bit more happening, but nope. It's almost entirely empty outside of a Deathrite bird and some more lore items. It's this really difficult thing to vocalize because there are areas where this is done very well and utilized properly. The Shaman Village is one of my favorite areas in the entire DLC, and there is absolutely not a single enemy in the entire zone. The only thing guarding it are the 2 separate tree sentinels, which, while I am annoyed to see them again, aren't the worst reused enemy. But the Shaman Village is important for the game's lore, as it is where Queen Marika grew up. And just seeing it like this, so quaint and serene, being bathed in the holy light, it's a really effective segment. So this is an area that being empty is truly effective, but the areas outside of it don't have that same feeling to them. And what gets me even more is that Miyazaki, you weren't sure what enemies to put in this area, or okay, you ran out of budget to make new ones or something of that matter. Okay, whatever. But did you have to reuse the enemies that were generally considered the worst of the base game and people were the most sick of? He does this so often, it feels like he's doing this on purpose, like it's some kind of sick joke. People were really tired of the dragons in the base game, it's not just me, and there were too many. So they just added another 4 before the boss fight? Nobody in the entire world thinks the Falling Star Beast is an enjoyable fight. I have never heard someone see that boss and do anything besides groan. So just throw another one in there. I cannot believe he put another Tibia Mariner in the DLC that spawns a Revenant, one of the worst enemies they have ever made, and then he superset that with another Deathrite bird. It's so terrible, I genuinely wonder if it's a bit like his poison swamp and foot fetish. Like, right now it's kind of funny, right? You know, thinking right now it is humorous, but looking back on it and having to possibly replay it, I'm furious. If he's gonna reuse enemies, can't he at least reuse the good ones? Holy shit. And truly, this is the incredible cherry on top of the cake, which is that it's not like they didn't learn from the problems of the base game. Despite all of my bitching, the bosses in this DLC are an enormous cut above what they were handing out before. I mentioned before I played post-Skibbity buff, and seeing what people were dealing with pre-buff, I can understand if they despise all of these bosses, particularly Rellana the Moon Knight, who seems to have given a lot of people a hard time. I myself found almost all of the base bosses of this game to be phenomenal, and a huge increase in general quality and fun than most of the late game fights of the base game. We already discussed a decent amount of the Divine Dancing Lion fight, and I did walk away from that one pretty happy, but what's more important is how good a lot of the other ones also were. One of my biggest complaints of late game Elden Ring bosses were that they were simply too much. There were too many attacks too often, too long of combos, all with very little ability to hit them back with a reprisal, and simply too often. They just spammed and spammed and spammed, graced you with a single R1 strike, and kept on going. This issue seems to genuinely have been taken into account for the design of the brand new bosses, and in doing so, we have gotten a list of real bangers here. In fact, I kind of want to go through them all individually, or at least the main remembrance bosses, and discuss them piecemeal. We already talked about the lion fight, so let's go to Rellana. I hate you, George R.R. Martin, and your naming conventions. Rellana is a really lovely fight that has a lot of movement to it and also is quite challenging for those who are not prepared for such a fast-moving boss. As the Dark Souls joke tends to go, the most intense fights are when you show up and they're about your same height. Overall, I really like a lot of her moves, and they're the kind of combos where she clearly has fast attacks and slow attacks, but all of the flurry combos you deal with are ones you definitely will not get on the first time around. so in order to properly learn all the various timings, you will need a few goes at her. She reminds me a great deal of Pontiff Solovam. It could just be because of the two blades type thing, but the general movement that she possesses definitely has a similar vibe. But the boss is just really fun. She's extremely elegant, the soundtrack is killer, and I think underrated in a DLC full of incredible soundtracks. This fight will be one of those ones that will be looked at very positively throughout the years. It's not necessarily simple, but it is gorgeous, fun to learn, and fun to beat. Romina, Saint of the Bud, is the most underrated boss fight of the DLC. This is like the third time they have done a female upper monster lower fight, and I'm not really sure what they're trying to say by that. It's a boss fight that has a lot of things that might make it seem annoying. I can think of very few bosses that will inflict you with a sort of poison or scarlet rot that end up being fun to fight, but she is definitely one of them. Most likely because the only scarlet rot you get hit by are the ones from her actual sword or magic spells, and she attacks with those only about half the time. For the most part, I find it very easy to dodge a lot of her attacks as they are relatively short flurries, and there are a lot of signifiers that make it easier to understand. The only ones that really gave me a lot of trouble are the ones that involve the scorpion body, because it moves so erratically like the dancing lion that just took me a while to figure out what was going on. Overall, similar to Rellana, a very good fight that feels incredibly fair and enjoyable, if maybe a little bit too much going on in the second phase with her jumping around the place. Okay, Mesmer the Impaler. Considering how much Mesmer was on the DLC cover art and how often he's mentioned, I didn't expect to run into him so damn soon. I didn't think we'd be fighting him so soon. He kind of operates somewhere in the middle point of the DLC, and I don't think you're supposed to fight him immediately, considering that you can just make your way all the way up the Shadow Keep and say what's up to him. It is still definitely something that I expected to deal with much later. Maybe not necessarily the final boss, but the last three. I am of the opinion that Mesmer is the best boss in all of Elden Ring, including the base game, which I know is very high praise, but I just find this fight to be absolutely exhilarating. Both cutscenes, the opening as well as the phase transition, are excellent, and the voice actor of Mesmer, despite only having a few lines, really crushes the delivery.
Soon tarnished. Wilt thou be taken in the jaws of the Abyssal serpent, shorn of light?
The visual appearance of him is also fantastic, a very unique spin on this kind of enemy, and the movement patterns and general animations are constantly excellent. The combos are definitely hard and require similar dodging mechanics to Rellana, but with a bit more variety, a little bit more timing, and a bit more directional emphasis. What makes me appreciate this boss so much is how fair it feels when it comes to reprisals. Mesmer's attacks have long combos, but the combos often have drag attacks in the middle, which can be utilized for quick hits with a fast weapon. But also, when the entire combo is over, there is almost always a decent period of time to get a good hit in. What's even more impressive is when he turns on the insane full screen attacks covering the entire place with snakes, it almost always ends with him coming out of one of the snakes right next to you, allowing for more hits. It's crazy to think that they were able to create a boss that has large moments of just full screen debauchery and yet make it feel fair. It's basically every issue I ever had with an Elden Ring boss, and then just tuned to be genuinely enjoyable. He's still hard, no doubt, but he feels fair for his difficulty, and that's something that I often do not feel like I can say for many of the other bosses in the base game. I love Mesmer. He's a huge joy and did not disappoint in the slightest. I don't have a whole lot to say about the Putrescent Knight. It's a relatively interesting looking fight. However, I arrived here pretty late in the game with a large amount of skinny bitch fragments, so I believe I took them out on my first try. Their health pool didn't seem that high, or at least was not high enough for the damage I was dealing. While there were still some pretty nasty combos, including the one where the horse would randomly pop out of the ground and chase you down, I still enjoyed the fight for the most part. My only real issue with it is that some of the random flame attacks going across the screen seemed a little bit difficult to figure out when and where to dodge them, but considering that, again, I did this fight my first time around, I'm sure with a few more tries I would have gotten the timing down. So I really don't like Commander Gaius. I think he's pretty terrible. The hitbox on the boar feels weird and janky and lingers often. I don't much like the mounted fights with the exception of a couple bosses. I find the Tree Sentinel to be mostly okay, but other things like the Knight's Cavalry constantly spending their time running away, and other fights like the aforementioned dragons are equally annoying because it just requires a ton of running towards the enemy. I'm not sure if this fight was meant to be done on horseback, but 90% of the time taking out Torrent for a fight tends to feel like a handicap, with the exception of them adding him to the Elden Beast fight, which I guess doesn't really change much about me liking the fight. It just means I get to head towards him a little bit quicker. This guy just bugs me a hell of a lot because of the dumb hitboxes I keep running into, or constantly being slammed to the ground or hit by some kind of lingering boar thing. It didn't take me too long to defeat this boss, but I certainly was not enjoying it the entire time. The Skibbity avatar was also not something that I thought was particularly great. The giant sunflower vibe was fine and the visuals were all pretty decent, but for the most part the fight just didn't do much for me. I did like the fake out a bit when it came back to life 2 times. I did think it was a bit too easy, and then realizing after the fact that was a decent fake out. But I have very little to say about this boss. I defeated them after completing the DLC, and for the most part it just felt like a large monster boss with a couple interesting moves, like the big AoE nuke and where it runs really fast across the map. Though unlike Mesmer, it ends the charge move often very far away, which makes the run back very annoying. It doesn't suck, but it isn't winning any awards. I've talked about Midra already a little bit, but I just love this fight. It gives me so much Bloodborne that I've been missing. This is another one of those fights that is really challenging, both with the amount of madness that is being sent around the arena and also just the act of learning the moves. But goddamn, do I love this fight. The visuals are great, the music is great, the fight is definitely challenging, but has a lot of reward to it all. You have to learn the moves pretty well, but you don't need to learn them all. Yet even with that, Midra keeps pressure up pretty well and has this motion that's so smooth, yet in a weird way. It messes with a lot of the attacks and how I try to dodge them, which has me rethinking how I approach the fight. Midra is genuinely a blast to fight, and I would be very happy to do it again. Meter, I hardly knew her, the Mother of Fingers, is a weird boss fight. It reminds me of Abritus, daughter of the Abyss from Bloodborne. The main difference being that I also first tried this boss because I was pretty late into the game, but I also summoned a level 10 Ash of the Great Shield Gooners. As loyal goons, they arrived and kind of mollywopped her into the dirt. The fight seemed really good. I kind of wish I had more to say about it because I took them out in my first try and feel like I barely did any of the work. So I'll have to defer to the masses on this one. It was actually after this that I decided maybe I shouldn't be summoning these guys anymore. 2 other quick boss fights I want to mention. One of them is not a remembrance. Bayle the Dread is just an incredible dragon fight. I say it again, it is one of the best dragon fights I think FromSoft has made. It beats out Calamite, Dark Eater Midir, all the ones from the base game, including Lich Dragon, Plantain, whatever the fuck. It genuinely just is the best dragon fight I've seen. Not only because its visuals are incredible and it has the best summon in the entire game, but also because the dragon is so damn aggressive. The camera doesn't fight you anymore like it normally did, especially with other dragon boss fights, cough cough, King of Storm, Dark Souls 3. It mostly stays with you the entire time. Bayle fights you very aggressively, but also has combos that can be dodged and provides you lots of openings that you can handle. He doesn't fly in the air and do a bunch of random bullshit keeping you stuck on the ground, but when he does do that, it's few and far between. And you get the best monologue put to screen. Lastly, we have Radahn. Radahn is a weird one because the entire time I've been talking up how good FromSoft has been at making their DLC bosses better than their main bosses, and that has all been in service of everything except for Radahn. Now, I will say from a lore perspective, Radahn is interesting, but I do kind of wish it was somebody else. I understand why it's Radahn, I see the reasoning for it all, and I'm glad it's not just a total reskin like the Star Scourge version, just rehashed, but it's still disappointing that at the end of the day, I'm just once again fighting Radahn for the final boss fight of what feels like basically a brand new game. That said, I do find the first phase to be it's pretty decent. He has a lot of moves, he has a lot of combos, and the combos require a decent amount of finesse to dodge. Do I think he could offer me a bit more time to hit him after these insane combos? Yeah, definitely. I think he gives me too few opportunities to fight back, but for the most part, it's annoying but not egregious in phase 1. In phase 2, that's when I think this is just total bullshit. If I'm not having an epileptic fit due to the amount of on-screen crap Miquella has been causing, then I'm spending the other amount of time fighting for my goddamn life. The amount of stuff on screen, the amount of AoE attacks and shadow ninjutsu aerial strikes and screen-wide holy nukes all at the same time, combined with the same, if not extended combos of the main phase that are even harder to dodge because he's got the golden bitch on his back brightening his entire model and casting holy light everywhere he strikes, makes it just an insurmountable task to know what the hell is going on. For the most part, it just reminds me of fighting the Orphan of Kos in Bloodborne. The first phase, I've got on lock. I can handle pretty well, without losing too many flasks that is, but the moment that second phase turns over, I'm fighting for every ounce of my being, and the apocalypse is now. The difference is that the Orphan at least somewhat matches the general pace that Bloodborne wants to be at, which is fast, frantic, yet mostly fair. Elden Ring is a slower game than Bloodborne, and General Radahn feels more in place in a Sekiro game. I'm not sure exactly what they've been struggling so much with, but they're now 0 for 2 in their final bosses. I guess in a way it sort of does mimic the base game where the beginning part, phase 1 Radahn or Radagon, is pretty good, and then the second half of it is just absolute dog shit. But despite my ranting right now, truly praise should be brought to the team for the bosses they have done in this DLC. A lot of the extra bosses are just Everjail fights or smaller things like that, but for the important ones, the remembrances and the story beats, most of them end up being significant improvements over the base game, not just in their fights, but also in their visuals, atmosphere, and especially the music, which seems to be better in almost every account. Which actually does go into another thing that they have improved on substantially, which is how they tell their story. This video is already full of what might be considered hot takes, so here's another one I can just throw at you so you can stew on it. There is a very big difference between lore and narrative. Lore is the creation of the world and the backstory of its characters, as well as the general themes and so on. Narrative is how that story is told within the framework of that world. Elden Ring, and for the most part many of these Souls titles, tend to have a fantastic amount of lore. The depth of its storytelling that happens off-screen and you discover through item descriptions and piecemeal detective work is very good. Its narrative, on the other hand, leaves a ton to be desired. You are very often just making your way through a dead world full of lore. How that story is expressed to you, the player, often again through detective work, YouTube videos, and item discovery, is not something I would call a good narrative, which might make you think I must hate waffles in that case, but just because this game doesn't have a phenomenal narrative in that sense does not mean it has to be Uncharted 2. But it is still something I took a decent amount of annoyance with when it was nominated for Best Narrative at the Game Awards a few years back. I find the narrative of Shadow of the Erdtree to be a step forward, because not only does it tell a story that is a bit more easily understood for the layman, but it also requires far less out-of-game research and gives you a little bit of hand-holding to help you understand the character quests and context clues. The game does not go full Ubisoft with quest markers and a log of important things, but it does give you small stuff such as notes from other NPCs and hand-drawn maps to help you understand what's next and what's going on. One of my personal favorite quests of the DLC involves Count Ymir and the Mother of Fingers. It's a quest where he asks you to go ring a strange finger bell and gives you a little map to do so. Now, I would really like a zoom feature on this map and not have to squint like I do in my inventory, but regardless, it is still just leaving you up to your devices, but gesturing in a direction. Then you do it again, and by doing so, you eventually get to fight one of the major remembrance bosses, the Mother of Fingers. It is a genuinely enjoyable quest that does not require too much of the classic, this NPC has randomly left, now who knows where he is, good luck finding them, and all of that crap. It's consistently enjoyable and, most importantly, easily understandable without the use of outside information. That said, other character storylines such as Ansbach and Redmane Freya also have similar and easily identifiable things to do. Of course, some are really simple, like Egon's quest where you chat with him, kill some dragons, chat with him, and then summon him for the boss fight. Now, while some of these aren't necessarily easy to do, and you'll probably still want to look up a few things for some of the quests, it is still a huge step in the right direction. It's also incredible to see the summoning mechanic utilized for NPCs tied to a large amount of the bosses in the game. Genuinely, it's great to do a person's quest, understand their motivation, summon them for a boss fight, and the main cherry on top, have lines of dialogue to deliver to the boss every time. It's basically required for Bayle, but bringing in Ansbach for Radahn or Hornset for Mesmer is just the extra icing on the cake. In fact, out of all of the fights in the DLC, the one that carries the most emotional impact is the gank fight before fighting Radahn himself. Once you realize that Miquella is a horrifying peace through brainwashing crazy asshole of a person, then Needle Knight Leda turns on you and tries to stop you. Whether or not you did a majority of the character quests and brought them to your side will determine how many of them you get to summon for this large gank fight. It's a super interesting mechanic and carries a large amount of emotional weight to it all. Hearing all the NPCs give their little speeches in this crescendo of a fight is something that just felt so impactful and is probably one of the highlights of the entire game. It makes me want to redo a playthrough, not even to fight the enemies and bosses again, but to do the quest lines. And I've never said that about a Souls game. I want to replay it for the character quest lines as opposed to the fights. That's how effective it was. Looking at my script here, I have already rambled for so long about this game, but there is one final discussion I do want to have. Because we have this every single time any of these games come out. It's time for the difficulty talk. A few common sense things need to be stated that I think have been lost through time. Firstly, every video game ever made is meant to be beaten. It is in fact incentivized to give you a wide variety of ways to do so because success and feelings of enjoyment are the reason people play video games. If they truly did not want you to win or wanted to make it nearly impossible, it would look very different. Secondly, there is no such thing as cheating yourself out of a whim. Extremely meta builds with incredibly strong weapons, over-leveling your character, summoning NPCs or your friends, as well as utilizing spirit ashes are all valid methods to defeat the game's bosses, and none of them are cheating nor removing enjoyment because they are chosen by the wielder as their preferred tool. Let me make this extremely clear. Doing a no summon and no ashes run is a challenge run. This is not the way the game is supposed to be played. A video game, a product, whose sole intention is to provide feelings of enjoyment and challenge and escapism, utilizing the mechanics in the game is only ever played incorrectly when it is utilizing bugs or cheats. Specifically, gating yourself out of items and things to help you win in a video game is literally the definition of a challenge run. Whether or not you consider it a superior experience is irrelevant. Now, do I think utilizing summons and things such as that take away a little bit of the enjoyment I get out of beating a boss? Sure, but that's on me, and that's my own character flaw. Imparting restrictions in a video game to other people to give yourself the moral high ground is a symptom of terminally online behavior, and I command you to leave your home. Now, on the concept of general difficulty, it's important to remember that difficulty often takes the form of something that is unenjoyable to a certain group of people. A game can be difficult for a lot of reasons. It might be mentally challenging, requiring things like memorization, speedy critical thinking, and puzzle solving. It might be mechanically challenging, requiring very quick reaction timing and specific inputs. And it can be challenging just for general gameplay annoyances, like having way too much health, requiring you to take much longer to defeat an enemy, or said enemy doing so much damage that mistakes are brutally punished with things like insta-kills. Difficulty can spiral into a lack of fun when not tweaked properly very easily. I thoroughly remember Destiny 1 Strikes, where difficulty at the hardest level meant bullet sponges all day that took an hour to complete. Was it difficult? Sure, but in an annoying way. In terms of Elden Ring's base game, I found the difficulty aggravating because enemies did way too much damage and did not provide nearly as many opportunities to attack them back. I was constantly in a state of inaction and was annoyed, spending eternity waiting for Malakath to stop spinning around in the air before I can do a singular R1, in which he then slams doing the two separate death attacks and killing me outright. Malenia famously ends the fight with a singular move, and even if you don't die to that, anytime you do make a small mistake and take damage, she undoes the damage you did to her. The whole point of difficulty is just knowing how to tweak the scale. Before the buff to the skibbity fragments, the issue with difficulty was that everything did just too much goddamn damage. When normal enemies have 100 attack combos, don't give you options to attack them back, and do most of your HP with a few of those attacks, yeah, one could argue it's too hard. But more importantly, it's just not fun to interact with. When you think about Sekiro as a game, you attack actually quite rarely in a lot of the boss fights, but blocking and parrying is a way to technically deal damage, so you're always active and feel like you're always doing something. Waiting for the 19th combo to end to get a little bit of damage and then move back into memorizing how to dodge the next combo is just not fun, because you, the player, are not getting a chance to do anything. So was the Elden Ring DLC too hard before the update? Possibly. The amount of times I saw people getting actually two-shot by a massive volume of moves, often just normal attacks, not even discussing the AoE nukes, just seemed kinda bullshit, especially when they had 60 points in health. The adjustment to make fragments better, I think, was absolutely correct, which is annoying because when it comes to the online discourse around the game, everybody is wrong. I have no better way to describe it. Everybody is wrong. People will give themselves a challenge run where they say no summons, no ashes, no rivers of blood, no status effects, and then say the game is too hard. Well, sorry, that's on you, brother, because then they will immediately turn around and say that people who use all the things they specifically state should not be used are not properly playing the game. It's ridiculous. But then those who also say something is simply easy, just do X or Y, don't understand the point that a game is supposed to be made for a wide variety of playstyles. If I'm a shield user and I run up to Malenia, I kind of have to just eat shit, and that's not cool. The idea that, oh, waterfowl isn't that bad, just have a frost pot, is such a wild thing to consider, that something is not a problem because a single singular item in the entirety of this open world game can nullify it. Just because I can insta-stun Revenants with a holy spell does not make Revenants not the worst thing in the world. Blowing through the entire DLC with ease just because you have the most meta build does not also mean that the game isn't overtuned. Just because you watch a YouTuber do a no-hit one-shot build run does not automatically mean that stuff might not still be a little ridiculous at times. So someone experiences this DLC and gets two-shot by one of the first enemies in the game and says, "This is bullshit," and that is somehow dispensed into a game of telephone that turns into Elden Ring is too hard, which then creates its own telephone, having a huge swath of people completely misunderstand the point. Of course it's supposed to be hard. It's a Souls game. Haven't you ever played a Souls game before? But you gotta get those clicks, don't you? You gotta get those YouTube views and that ad revenue, so you cook yourself up a dog shit title of "People are bitching that Souls games are too hard," and you put a crying baby emoji on the thumbnail before preparing your 13th dissertation about why pronouns in Starfield is leading to the fall of Western society, because you have been bludgeoned either by society, corporations, or both to crush every single opinion into 140 characters. So nuance, reasoning, context, and God forbid expanded thoughts are replaced with Elden Ring too hard, to then be immediately followed up by a short and juvenile get good. We deserve better. You deserve better, but you won't get it when discourse continues like this. It shouldn't require someone like me making a video to explain that, yeah, a hard game can be too hard when the part that's too hard becomes massively unfun, and imparting restrictions on others in a video game, which is, again, designed to let you win, is, as the kids would say, cringe. None of us leave this feeling good about ourselves. We do this song and dance after every single Souls game that comes out. The too hard questions, the get good responses, the accessibility statements, the fact that you can have anyone actually in a clear conscience complain that someone else installed an easy mode because they themselves cannot beat the game is ludicrous. You cannot gatekeep someone's fun and how they interact with the media they have purchased for themselves that harms nobody else. I repeat, leave your home immediately. Leaving the Elden Ring DLC. My mind basically thinks that the game systems that we have in store for us here are at their limit. There will always be people able to do a Rune Level 1 no-hit run, because when a game touts itself as being very difficult, there will always be someone out there to prove it wrong, whether for general prestige, personal enjoyment, or YouTube views. Take a look at every single Ultra Kill run for more examples. But Elden Ring, and for the most part a large amount of the Souls games, feel as if their style of combat and their defensive options are genuinely at their limits. They were broken a few times in the base game, and definitely this time with Radahn's second phase, but for the most part, they were able to roll it back and provide a large amount of bosses that were incredibly fun and acceptable with this style of combat, but it definitely feels like it is bursting at its seams. I suppose you could say that the next Souls game having fights similar to this DLC would be perfectly fine, but it would run the risk of ending up being rather samey after a while. Even now, a lot of the bosses in this DLC tend to have very similar moves. Almost all of the main bosses have a couple variations of the 5-hit combo, just retooled. If anything, I imagine FromSoft might pivot to something closer to like the Sekiro style of game, but perhaps with a little bit more character customization and replayability. It does feel like we are at our limit here, and some things have to change. Elden Ring added a jump button, which helped a lot, but is not everything that we needed. It's not to say Elden Ring or this DLC is bad, but the holes in the boat are starting to show. We haven't sunk yet, but getting a little anxious. All in all, discussing FromSoft games is never an enjoyable prospect. It contains a fervent fan community that is overzealous, if not downright infuriating. But to their credit, at least they chose the right game to be annoying with, because Souls-like games from FromSoftware specifically continue to be some of the best in the genre, and very few can reach their heights. Not to mention the general enjoyment of having such a strong game that is $60 or in this case $50 with no microtransactions of any kind. And a lot of people have been annoyed with the whole digital deluxe edition, but I was actually sent one by Bandai Namco, and if everyone had 18 inches of Mesmer the Impaler, I think they would be a lot more keen on it. But I hope I illustrated what I was trying to say when I mentioned 5 steps forward and 3 steps back. This is more Elden Ring, no doubt about it. And if you like Elden Ring, you'll probably like this. But if you had issues with Elden Ring, you're going to have issues with this. While there were definitely improvements, some of the main issues that came with the base game are still present, and it is beginning to crumble under the weight of its ambition in a game that just can't quite keep up with it. Shadow of the Erdtree is a really fantastic expansion, and it adds a genuinely solid amount of content for its price point. It is very much worth picking up despite my complaints about it. But if you were expecting something revolutionary, something that changed up the formula and showed us what the future holds for FromSoft titles, specifically Soulsborne, then I have some bad news for you. It is more Elden Ring, for better and for worse. Thank you very much for watching this very long video. If you want this shirt, it's No Maiden shirt. It's available on the merch site. Check out the description. It says right there. It's in hoodies and shirt form. It's all right there. Check it out. Thank you so much for supporting me. It's a long video. It's a very long video. So thanks for watching all the way through. That's very nice of you. I appreciate it.